merciful, and I'm just living in this environment of mercy. And then he goes on and says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Pure in heart, this idea here of singleness of heart. When something like pure salt, what is it? It's just salt. Pure gold, what is it?
Gold.
It's just gold. There's nothing mixed in it. And the purity of heart here is the purity of heart that is looking for God in everything. That realizes that God is with us in every scenario, in every circumstance, in every relationship. God is present. Right? That God's kingdom isn't something that you have to go to a temple for. Right? And these ideas are radical for his day. Right? Because for the Jews, at that point, where would you go to meet with God? Go to the temple. Jesus says you don't have to go to the temple to see God. He's right here. You can experience him right here, right now. Right? That if you didn't get a good quiet time today, well, guess what? God's still available. Right? He's here right now. Right? To interact with you, to engage you, to see him. And when your heart is for God, singularly for God, what are you going to see? You can see God in everything. Oh, the joy of the people that see God in everything. That see God in every situation. When something bad happens, what do they see? God. When something good happens, what do they see? God. And that's why Peter says, we rejoice in trials. Right? Because what does Peter see there? God sees God in it. Oh, the misery of those that only see God in having their own preferences met. Because God isn't about meeting your preferences. And if you're limiting yourself to experiencing God only at church, or only in your quiet time, or only when you get your way, what are you going to be? Miserable. You're going to miss out on the joy of God's kingdom, of God's presence in everything, God's pervasive presence all the time. Then he goes on and says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. And again, oh, the joy of those who are at peace, because that's a family characteristic. Oh, the joy of those who are at peace, because that's a family characteristic. And again, he's using this family analogy, right? That their families have characteristics, don't they? Right? Like you think of like the Hatfields and the McCoys for the U.S. What are those two names, those family names? What connotations do they bring up?
Feud, hostility.
Feud, hostility, and there are families that are just hostile. It's the family characteristic. Some of you grew up in families, that was the family characteristic. Right? It was abusive, it was argumentative, it was hostile. And what does God say about his family? It's peaceful. Peace with him, peace with each other, peace with those that are part of different clans. That when you're part of God's family, when you're adopted into God's family, what's the joy you get to experience from being part of that family? Peace. Peace. Oh, the joy of those who are at peace with God and at peace with other people, that have no axe to grind, no agenda to push, just willing to be God's instrument of peace in the world. Then the last one, he says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, in the way Jesus, the literary style that Jesus uses, we call it just a theological term, it's called the parenthetical inclusive. He puts two parentheses, two statements that say all of this is the kingdom of heaven. Makes sense that by starting with the first one saying the kingdom of heaven, last one saying this is the kingdom of heaven, what he's saying is everything here is the king. Everything within those statements is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus has just described in summary statement, and then he's going to go into all the details in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. He's saying this in a nutshell is what it means to participate in the kingdom of heaven. Right? That you're going to be dependent on God, and in that dependency you're going to find comfort. as you're compassionate, you're going to find yourself satisfied. You're going to find yourself at peace. You're going to be accepted. Everything that you're longing for in my righteousness, you're going to be filled with. This is what it means to participate. This is your identity as my followers. This is the kingdom that I've come to establish. This is the kingdom you can have today, right now. Does that make sense? And so it's this bombshell that he's dropping on his guys, totally turning the paradigm upside down. Saying I'm not starting a religion, I'm not starting a military movement, it's got nothing to do with politics. It's all about what you can grab a hold of today. If you'll be a part of this kingdom. This is your identity as a follower of Christ. It's not that you go to the Rock Church, it's not that you're part of Impact, it's not that you're an American or a Kenyan or a, what are the other nationalities you got? Ukrainian, Filipino, Haitian, whatever. That's not your identity. Your identity is that you are someone who by faith has grabbed a hold of the kingdom of God. Make sense? So try to shed this Western approach to these as being conditional statements. We're such a performance-based culture that I say, okay, I've got to do this to get this. I've got to mourn in order to be comforted. No, it's saying that part of God's kingdom is a compassion that gets comforted by the spread of God's kingdom. Right? That I've got to be meek in order to inherit the earth. No, God's given you all things. So you don't have to force your way. You don't have to grab and take. The joy of those who can just surrender to God's sovereignty and realize that all good things that he wants to give me are mine. Does that make sense? I don't have to grab anything that's already mine. It's already been given. Does this make sense?
Is there a difference in the language between peacemakers and peacekeepers?
No, I don't think there would be that distinction. Peacekeepers is kind of a modern concept, like UN peacekeepers, and that's more of a keeping by force. This is just that in your relationships, you bring peace to the equation.
On your half of the equation, it's not conditional, so if the other person doesn't enter into the peace.
Here's the great thing about peace, is that peace so think of it like simple math. 2 plus 2 equals what? 4. If I don't like 4, what do I have to do to change the outcome? I just have to change one number, and I change the outcome. So if I have, say 4 is hostility, and I don't want that anymore, I just change me to an 8. Now I've got 10. Nobody else has to change. God is perfectly at peace with himself, and he brings that peace to bear on all his relationships. Okay? So even if someone is hostile towards you, you don't have hostility until you respond in kind. Right? So if you bring peace to it, all they are is a hostile person, but you don't have hostility. Make sense? Hostility requires retaliation. And then we are at odds with each other. That's why Jesus makes all these crazy statements, like if someone slaps you on the right cheek, do what? Let him slap the left one. I mean, it's what he's saying is, don't retaliate. Don't retaliate. Right? And then you'll be like God. Does God retaliate against us? Aren't you glad?
So there'll be peace on your half of the equation because you're in the kingdom of God here and now, and you're at peace here and now. But it doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't enter into the equation of hostility to the other person, they may still be hostile.
They may choose not to participate in the kingdom of heaven, but you are. You can grab a hold of that kingdom, and you can be someone who brings peace when they're trying to provoke hostility. And you'll see that all the New Testament writers, like Andre was saying, this is a keystone teaching. kind of Jesus' stump speech in a sense. Right? This is the heart of all his other messages, and you'll see it reflected in all the other writings of the New Testament. Paul says the kingdom of God is not eating and drinking, but what? Righteousness, peace, and oh, the joy of those that participate in it. Right? And you'll see that these ideas of the Beatitudes reflected in all the other major writings. Because these guys understand this and they key in on it. Alright? Alright?
How much time do you think you want to give them here?
What do you think?